Growing up, I had a few river experiences. Anybody else have river experiences that just are embedded in your mind? For me, one of them was the Apple River. As a family, a couple times, we made the jaunt over to the Apple River. Nowadays, you go to Wisconsin, you don't go to the Apple River, you go to all all of the theme parks that are there. Then you can ride all the different lazy rivers if you want. But for me, it was the Apple River. And I remember it was a day of fun and just relaxing and enjoying and tubing down this river. Then you get to the end, and there's kind of these rapids. Anybody else do those rapids? Remember? Okay, good. We had the similar experience. For me, it was at the end, that was the most exciting part. So I would do the rapids, rinse, and repeat, up and down, and just keep going, because that was the fun part. It was over the rocks and the bounce of the water, the movement of things. That was an experience of learning how water moved. Later in life, I got to take the trip to Colorado to do some whitewater rafting. Anybody else have those experiences in life? Was that a joy? Was that fun? I remember specifically sitting down, and this was with a youth group, and we're trying to figure out how to do things right. And the guide sits us down. You're sitting in the space that you're going to be riding in. You're still on land. And you've got your life jacket on. You've got your helmet on. I mean, it's like safety measures here, because they know you can get hurt, you fall off, hit your head on a rock. And so they've got you seated there ready to go. And he starts going through these commands. And if he barks this command, you got to row this way. And if he barks that command, you got to back row. And there's certain commands. And he says there's some spots in the river that are a bit challenging. And the water's moving a little fast. And so you've got to listen and you've got to move quick. And when we get to this one spot, you're going to have to really listen, because there's a rapid right before a bridge. And I remember we're getting up on this bridge, and you can just see everybody's kind of like, oh, yeah, a little bit of tense and excited, and the water's moving pretty good, and about we're bouncing over some of these rapids, and we're moving right towards this bridge, but there's this support right in the middle. And the closer we get, he's like, no, this, and he's barking the orders faster and faster, and we're all going like this, and I don't know if we were all going the right direction or not, but what happened is our whole raft got turned this way. And about the time we get under the river, under the bridge, all of a sudden, up against this support beam, and it literally takes that raft, wraps that thing right around that support beam. All of us go flying off of this thing and floating down the river and moving. You got to, it actually says, everybody make sure your feet are down river, because, in case you hit a rock, you'd rather have your feet hit the rock than your head. And I remember in that experience learning that water moves. A river is unstoppable. It cannot be slowed or contained. Yes, we can build dams, but there has to be an outlet. There has to be a movement of water, because that water has a destination in mind. It's going to flow downstream, and that might start as a brook. It might move into a stream, and it might become a river like the Mississippi, but its destination is not the Mississippi, is it? Where's that water going? That water is all moving downstream. It's all moving toward the ocean. It has a desire to go to the deep. We're talking about this Discipleship Pathway sermon series, and it's all got this imagery. And in fact, I think we might be out of brochures out there. I might have to grab some more this week. But we're talking about this Discipleship Pathway that we're all called to go deeper. And the imagery is that we're all called to move from a brook, just a little trickling spiritual movement in our life, into a stream or into a river, and all the way into the deep of an ocean. And we've been talking about these in relation to our membership vows. And our membership vows being, okay, I should quiz you guys. Anybody remember what our membership vows in the Methodist Church are? Prayers, presents. We talked about those the last 2 weeks, so you better get those. Our prayers and our presents, our gifts, service, and witness. We got them. Prayers, our presence, our gifts, our service, and our witness. So we've talked about prayers and how we can go deeper in prayer. And if you're looking for some guides, there's even some tools out there on the table. We talked about presence and how you can be more engaged in maybe some small groups or other things that you can get involved in. And there's some helps out there on the table, or you can always ask me and I'll help you get involved. Today we're talking about gifts. We're talking about how we can move deeper using our whether it's our financial gifts or our talents, our passions. We're talking about how we can engage in those areas. So this passage today, I think, is powerful. Jesus stands up in a crowd. I like the way he does this. He stands up and he cries out. You can just imagine at a wedding feast, everybody's having a good time. They've had wine. And Jesus stands up and he cries out, "If anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink." Of course, he was talking about water, but it might have been the wine that they were thinking about. I'm not sure. He says, "Come to me and I will give them drink." And then he goes on and says, "Whoever believes in me, as the scripture has said, out of his heart or her heart will flow rivers of living water." Now, first of all, before I go any deeper, let's remind ourselves what water means, what water is representative of specifically for Jesus and for those living in Israel. It's a desert. It's a place where water means life. And without water means there's no life. It's death. You remember the wells that were dug in the Old Testament, and it tells stories of how people would travel from one well to the next well because that was the only way that they could have life, or that they would have to follow the Jordan River or around the Sea of Galilee. But there was always a space where they had to have water. Jesus refers to himself in Scripture as the living water. So here Jesus says, "Come to me if you're thirsty and I will give you drink." But then he doesn't just stop there. He says, "I will cause you out of your heart to flow rivers of living water." I mean, think about it for a minute. He's not just saying, "Hey, you're going to trickle a little bit." He doesn't say you're going to have a few drops of goodness coming out of you. He says, rivers. Now, again, think of this in the context of Israel. Rivers, they only have one river. They only have one space where a river feels like anything substantial. It's a river of living water. What does it mean? What does Jesus mean by that? Water seems to be that precious resource. It's something that they depended on. It was a symbol of life, symbol of abundance and blessing. And Jesus tells us that the symbol of life and of blessing literally flows through us. Jesus tells us that the symbol of blessing is to move from us to others. Now, in this passage, one of the things that one of the commentators says is this: rivers is this word that is used to express abundance, a full supply. It means here that those of us who refer to ourselves as Christians or who come to Jesus to be filled shall diffuse large or liberal or constant blessings upon their fellow men. As Jesus immediately explains that they shall literally be instruments to which the Holy Spirit shall be poured down upon the earth. Think about this for a minute. Scripture says that you'll be a blessing to others. That the blessings you have been filled with will move to fill others. Have you ever thought of yourself as a vessel? A tool that God would use to bless others? Because that's what Jesus is literally saying here. That we will be a tool, a vessel, that Jesus is giving a drink of living water, and then we will be flowing out with rivers. So one could still ask, what does it really mean? How do we do that then? How do we pour God's blessing out into the world? Now let me just clarify. I think that God gives us purpose. God gives us talents. God gives us blessings. God gives us communal purpose together, and God gives us talents and passions. Let me put it in this language. If we enter the water in a brook, if we were to get in there in an inner tube like on the Apple River, and if we were just to stay and let that river take us, we would recognize that what God is doing, it's pulling us ever deeper to the point that we finally reach the ocean. Now, there might be some obstacles in the midst of that. We're just going to assume that that's not part of this conversation, but the water's going to take us to the ocean. And I believe that with the gifts and talents that we have, With the ability to love and to serve others, we have the ability to set our hearts upon the ocean. We have the ability to go ever deeper, to move with our gifts and our talents, to actually participate with God in bringing blessing to others. And we can allow the river of God to flow through us, to rush through us. St. Chrysostom, he's one of the early, just call him a preacher of preachers. He was actually known as the golden tongue of his age. And of course, not all language translates from one to another with poetic verse, but he says this about this passage. He says, one may perceive what is meant here if you will consider the wisdom of Stephen, the tongue of Peter, the vehemence of Paul, how nothing withstood them. Not the anger of multitudes, not the uprising of tyrants, nor plots or devils, or daily deaths, but as rivers borne along with loud and rushing sounds, they went on their way. Like that experience that I had on the whitewater rafting trip. There was nothing that was going to stop that water from moving. Us thinking that we were going to lazily enjoy the ride, we didn't direct the course. That river was headed downstream. That bridge that happened to be there, it didn't stand in its way. It moves around it. It constantly moves ever deeper. Perhaps what we should really ask ourselves is, where are we at? Where are we at in the expression of sharing of our gifts, of our talents, of our abilities? Where are we at in this spectrum of water, if you will? Are we participating in a brook? How deep have we gone with one another? Are we in the stream, or are we the river or the ocean? And so what I'm asking everybody to do in this sermon series each week is to imagine where you're at. Imagine to what level you're participating, and then ask God to give you the courage to take one more step, or to go a little deeper, or let the river take you that much further. Now, if you grab one of the brochures that's out there, or should be out there, I would have you look at that and notice that they're all in categories. Prayers, how you can be a brook, how you can be a stream, an ocean, and a river, or presence, or gifts, or service, or witness. Today we are talking about gifts, and we're talking about how we can go deeper. And if I back up just to the brook, we'll notice that in the brook, we'll notice that that might be something pretty small. It might be just giving a small gift to church once. It might mean that we're actually attending church once in a while. It might mean that we're not really a part of a small group. We're not really praying a whole lot, but we're in a brook. I'll tell you what, again, there's no wrong space to be, because wherever you're at, you're in the river and you're on the journey. What God is inviting us to do is go deeper. So maybe you're in a brook, and let me tell you again, remind you, the feelings that go with having a spiritual life that is in a brook, there's this feeling, a little bit of a sense of fear, a little bit of a sense of confusion or uncertainty. What is it that's going on? I sense God stirring the waters, but I'm not really sure what God's doing yet. In fact, I would tell you that for most people, stepping into the brook is the scariest step. It feels like the biggest stretch, whether it's to give a little bit financially, or whether it's just to show up on a regular basis, whether it's to help with a service project, or whether it's just to commit a little more time in prayer. The brook is the scariest step. But once we take that first step, it's just like walking a mile. You take the first step and just the next one comes. It's like that kid that's afraid to get in the water the first time. And then they get in the water and they find out it's fun. And you can't ever get them out of the water. It's that first step that's hard. For somebody who's been in the brook and they're kind of like, okay, I can do this just a little bit. I can give just a little bit, or I can give some time. I can be in church once a month. the next step is just to let God challenge you one more step. So that means maybe you give regularly to church, or as a stream, we're going to talk about how we can build relationships as we get deeper, utilizing our talents in unison with one another, serving and blessing others side by side. And you know what? Our attitude begins to change. It's kind of like that kid that's splashing around in the water, and once they get over their initial fear, all of a sudden things are like, oh, this is kind of cool. There's some joy and there's some amazement. Wow, I thought it was scary, but it's fun. And there's a sense of curiosity. What can I do in the water? I remember growing up in Okoboji that there was all kinds of things. I kept finding out how much fun you could have. I found out not only could you be in boats or could you be you could actually flip those boats upside down and have little forts that you kind of carried around with you, and all kinds of fun stuff that you could do in the water. Because as you get deeper, you have a sense of curiosity and joy and exploration that you just want to participate more. Our feelings begin to be one that we recognize God's blessing. We recognize that God is giving us a blessing. God is working in our lives. So then you go another step deeper. You just try a little bit more, and all of a sudden you step into the river, which we talked about today. This river of living water, this river that God is pouring into us and that is flowing out of us. This river might mean that instead of just giving regularly, we're like, okay, how can I step it up? What's the next step? What does it mean? And of course, God does talk about tithing 10%. And I would say, biblically, this talks about 10% of all that we are. Not just tithing 10% of our finances, but tithing 10% of our time, our energy, our gifts, our abilities, our passions, giving priority to God in things that we recognize are God's gift in the first place. It's an act of honoring God because God has poured the blessings into us. Here's where our attitude really gets exciting. When you find that you've got a talent or an ability, whether it's you've got an ability to play an instrument, whether you've got an ability to just run or for sports, or you've got an ability in a certain work area or language use, whatever your gift is, and all of a sudden you get excited about it. There's an anticipation. How can I use this? How can I glorify God with what I've been given? And you begin to intentionally look around and say, I've been blessed. How can I use this to bless others? How can I let God's blessing fill me more and pour through me more? Our feelings move from that fear at the very beginning to a sense of joy and an understanding that God is the one that's moving all this blessing through us. That God is the one present in our lives. And we begin to truly let the water flow faster. We begin to draw deep on the presence of God, and we participate. We recognize that it's not just an act of giving in our offering plate. It's not just the act of showing up at something. It's that we're participating with God. Think about that for a minute. Do you ever realize that showing up in worship and worshiping together, we're participating with the presence and power of God? As we give an offering that is going out into the world, we're participating with what God is doing. As we share our gifts for leadership or service to others, we're participating in bringing the blessing of God to others. We're literally letting the living water of Christ pour into us and the river of living water flow out of us. By the way, there's one step deeper yet. We're still in the river. What happens when you jump into the ocean? The truth is, the ocean is that deep space. That deep space, you're talking financially, and I know people who abundantly give beyond 10%. They're blessed in such a way that they recognize God's blessing. They say, I just want to participate. I have so much fun blessing others. But we're not just talking about the financial gifts. We're talking about our passions and our gifts. We're talking about the ways that we can serve and care for others. We're talking about actually the river of life becoming a lifestyle for us. It becomes an ecstatic joy, and it fills us with peace. Actually, there's an anticipation. It's like somebody who wakes up in the morning and says, okay, God, I'm ready. Give me just a little bit of your spirit because I'm looking for ways I can pour it out. I'm excited to wake up this morning, God, because I know that I'm going to have an opportunity to bless somebody. You're going to put somebody in my path that I can bless. Truth is, an ocean can be a little scary. Even if you stand there in amazement on the beach and you look out and you see it's endless. But you get stuck in the middle of it. You just realize there's no way out. But when you recognize that God is the whole, God is the fullness, God is the depth, God is the complete presence that surrounds you in the midst of that space, you recognize that you are just this conduit that God is using to bless and to pour out life-giving water onto everyone you touch. This is the space that God is calling us all into. This is the space that I believe Christ lived into. This is the space that I believe as Christians we're called to represent Christ and to look for ways to bless others in that infinite way. The truth is, I don't expect many of us to get to this point, whether it's financially, whether it's talents and service or prayers. I think we do, but I think we get glimpses of it. And because of our world and because of our busyness, we kind of get bumped back, you know? It's like that, the constant tide moving in and out. Even when we get there for a moment, we recognize that something bumps us back. Brothers and sisters, it's not where you're at that's important. Well, it is, because I want you to recognize where you're at. Identify for yourself, I think I fall about right here. And through the course of this month, I'm going to invite you to think of that for each space, whether it's prayers. I'm in a brook for prayers, or for presence. Maybe I'm in a stream. I'm kind of forgiving, for gifts, or for service, or for witness. Where am I at? And then what I'm inviting you to do is prayerfully think how you can take one more step. Because the truth is, it's not a step that's going to be a burden. It's going to be a step that's going to be a blessing. Because you're going to be allowing more of the living water of Christ to flow through you. The living water that fills you to abundance and blesses you. So today I invite you, I challenge you to think about those things. Now today specifically, we are talking about stewardship. Usually we spend a few weeks each year just to talk about stewardship and what it means for a church to have what's needed to continue for ministry and otherwise. And actually next week, Carrie's going to stand up and talk about that a little bit more. But I do have a couple handouts here for you that I'm going to give to you after service. And this first one, we've had a lot of questions about ways in which you can give. And this has a whole list on here, which, believe it or not, is a lot more than you can imagine. It's everything from giving online to texting to giving in the offering plate to volunteering at Wells Fargo for concerts. There's also a way you can sign up for UMC Market when you buy stuff online, whether it's Target or Staples or any of those spaces, and it gives you instructions how to do that. Amazon Smile. Or if you want to have some fun with the kids and you want to rent the bounce house, there's a donation that you can make to the church for that, and it gives specific directions how to utilize each and every one of those on here. So this is a great card, just a resource to help each of you understand how you can participate that way. And then here's what we usually do each year, is we hand out stewardship cards, and that helps us. We hand these out because it helps us plan the budget for next year. It helps us know the level of participation and ministry that we're going to be able to do in our community. And so we hand these out just so that we can do some planning. And we will be turning these in November 2nd and 3rd. So we're giving these out in time for you to take them home, pray over them, and think about them, and then bring them back. I believe you'll also get them in the mail. So don't think that's duplication. It is duplication of efforts, but it's making sure that there's one in your hand to pray over. And then they'll also be out on the table for you as well. So even though today we've talked some specifically about finances, I want you to understand that what we're talking about is the very full presence of God that's at work in your life, that is drawing you deeper, that is pulling you, the force of water that is moving, drawing you to the deep in relationship with God. And I'm inviting you to ask yourself the question, have you become comfortable or complacent or stagnant? Have you found yourself eddied in a pool, in a stream? You know you need to go deeper, but you're just not ready. You're not sure how or uncomfortable. This is a series that invites you to take that one step deeper. Or as Jesus said, if any of you are thirsty, come to me and I will give you living water. And out of your hearts will flow rivers of living water.